Hello and welcome. Today I'm going to talk about the hidden costs of death, illiteracy, and how it disconnects us from ourselves, from others, and from the sacred. We've talked about the physical, logistical, and financial consequences of death illiteracy. And now the real attention is on the things that we don't often look at: the spiritual, the emotional, and the relational aspects of ourselves. And as we've talked about, most of us have inherited a world where death is not just denied, it's actively removed from our daily life. And the way we grieve, the way we live, the way we find meaning, the way we relate to each other is all impacted from that. And so my invitation is to really just let this in, and then you can ask yourself some questions about whether this is true. Um, but we get spiritually disoriented when we move through life without these bookends, right? These cosmological understanding of where we come from and where we're going. As soon as we can think and feel as children, we ask ourselves these questions. And then we learn from others that it's not okay, or it's only okay in one way. And we have this full arc of a cycle in our lives, from death to growth to initiations, all throughout our lives, to decline and to return and to death and decay. And all intact cultures, including our ancestral cultures, lived as if this really mattered, as if these cycles we are embedded in were deeply sacred and we were held by them, right? And understanding death as a passage, as a return, as a continuation, as a life cycle, as a return every year of the spring, as a return of birth after death, of new growth. These were heartbeats for our understanding of how to trust the world, ourselves, our community, each other. And without those heartbeats, without those pulses of truth, of touch base, touch in with the mystery, we're really sort of roiling in fear, right? Death phobia. We've lost the through line and the thread. And as a result, it's hard for us to be really fully alive. Another emotional cost is feeling isolated, right? One of the most devastating consequences of death illiteracy is that we feel alone in our grief. We feel alone in navigating loss and change, whether it's a smaller loss and change, initiation, transition, whether it's a divorce or our children leaving home or a pet dying, anything. Death helps us learn how to talk about these things, how to witness, how to be present, how to navigate within ourselves these small griefs that lead to big grief. And when we don't have community around us, when we don't talk about death, we're isolated. And as my teacher Sobanfu Somé likes to say, no one grieves alone. And no grief is an individual grief. All grief is a shared communal process. And when we lose the muscle of tending to those, we lose the ability to show up for each other in our losses and in our pain. We don't know what to say. We avoid, we shut down, we distance, we send meaningless condolences, and we don't have the language. So when we put down these rituals, we put down our literacy, our ability to articulate, and even more, the dying are left alone, because it's scary to us when we haven't built the capacity. Some of the spiritual costs of death illiteracy is the sacred, right? Relationship with the unknown. In all cultures that are deeply engaged with the sacred and the unknown, there is always preparation for something larger. There is always a spirit or a soul or an essence or a self connected with the physical body. There's an understanding that we're woven into not only cycles, but the great turning of life through the ages. And these connections are severed in a death-denying world. We're taught that death is the end, it's a failure, it's a void. And this comes from an overly materialistic culture that doesn't know how to or value the ability to tend to the non-material. So these things have been handed to us. Really, it's outside of our control to see death as the enemy, and it severs the relationship with life itself. The other cost is sort of a somatic cost, the fear that lives in our bodies. When we think of death avoidance, it's not just an intellectual problem, but it's a body problem. When we're disconnected from death, we live in tension. We're more easily manipulated into doing, thinking, being, engaging in things that aren't really fully bringing us alive. And we fear the inevitability of aging, of change, of letting go. And this shows up in every area of our lives where we grasp for control, where we have and we struggle with mental illness, where we really have a hard time riding the waves, the ups and the downs of life. And so when our bodies start to really get that we understand the cycles and the temporary nature of our existence, honestly, it relaxes. It shows us how to surrender. It shows us how to let go. And building the capacity for those things is really accentuated when we have a death practice, a daily death contemplation. So I invite you to sit with this. How does this land in your body, your emotions? How does this show up in your community, in your aging process, in your sense of purpose, or your connection with something larger to yourself than yourself? What would change if you softened into death instead of resisting it? What would change in your life? And what does it look like to reclaim some of these pieces? If this speaks to you, I invite you to continue the conversation with yourself, with your loved ones, with me in the comments, or in the other videos I create. Thank you for being brave to look at this difficult topic.